Welcome to our deep dive on boredom. We're going to, explore that restless feeling we all get sometimes.
Yeah.
And you might be surprised to hear that boredom, it's not just a modern annoyance, it's way deeper, and even animals experience it.
It really is fascinating.
To guide us on this deep dive, we have Professor James Dankert. He's a cognitive neuroscientist who spent years studying boredom.
Well, it's something we can all relate to, isn't it?
For sure. But before we get into, why goldfish might get bored, let's start by defining boredom.
Right.
Professor Dankert, you mentioned this Tolstoy quote, and it really stuck with me. Boredom is the desire for desires. What does that even mean?
Well, let's break it down. When you're bored, your brain's actually craving engagement, but it doesn't know what kind.
Ah, I see.
And that disconnect, that's what makes boredom so frustrating. It's like your brain's saying, let's do something, anything, but you're stuck because you just don't know what that something is.
So it's not just the lack of stimulation, it's this seeking but coming up empty.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay, but if it's so uncomfortable, why do we even experience boredom? Is it a modern problem?
Not at all. Boredom actually has a purpose. It's like a call to action pushing us to find something meaningful.
Okay, so boredom has a purpose. But how is destroying your shoes or chewing on furniture a sign of progress?
Well, put yourself in your dog's paws. They're alone for hours with nothing to do. They chew things not because they enjoy it, but because they're desperate for stimulation.
Ah, so they're just trying to find something.
Yeah, and there's research showing that mice would rather have an unpleasant air puff than do nothing.
So it's more than seeking comfort, it's finding meaning even if it's mischief. But how do we know it's really boredom? Not something else like disinterest or a mental health issue.
That's a great question. You're right to be mindful. Boredom is a motivational state. You want something, but you don't know what. It's different from apathy, where you just don't have any desire.
Right.
But when it comes to mental health, things get complicated. While boredom itself isn't depression or anxiety, there is a link. More research is needed, but boredom can contribute to those challenges.
So it's something to pay attention to. And these days, the second we feel bored, we reach for our phones.
Yeah, it's almost automatic.
Has that helped or hindered our relationship with boredom?
Well, it's interesting because this worry about technology's impact isn't new. Even Socrates worried that writing would hurt our memories.
Wow. Really?
But while a small percentage of people have problematic smartphone use passively scrolling, doesn't address the core of boredom.
So we're silencing the call to action instead of answering it.
You could say that.
But Professor Dankert suggests we'd be happier if we did respond to that call. Is he saying we should just give in to boredom every time?
Not exactly. He doesn't think it's about eliminating boredom entirely. It's probably impossible and maybe not even a good thing.
I see.
Those who say they're never bored are probably just great at finding ways to engage with something meaningful.
So instead of avoiding it, what's a healthier approach?
Well, Professor Dankert suggests two things. First, stay calm. You know that restless feeling you get when you're bored. Counteract that. It creates space to find a positive way forward.
So the first step is to stay calm. Okay, got it. What's the second part of Professor Banker's strategy?
The second part is to ask, why am I bored? What's not engaging me? Sometimes reframing can help.
You mentioned assembly line workers earlier. Is that what they're doing, reframing?
Exactly. They have repetitive tasks that could easily lead to boredom, but some workers create personal challenges to make it more engaging, like trying to beat their previous record or focusing on quality.
That's a cool way to look at it. So sometimes it's reframing, but other times boredom's telling you it's time for a bigger change.
Right. Boredom can be a sign to try a new hobby, rethink your career, or spend more time with loved ones. It's your inner voice saying, time for a change.
So instead of dreading boredom, we should see it as a signal, a chance to align with our deeper needs. And it's not always huge life changes. Professor Dankert talked about smaller goals, too.
Yeah, he did. It's easy to get overwhelmed by these grand aspirations. Our culture celebrates big achievements, but fulfilling moments can come from everyday things, like finishing a book, learning a new recipe, or taking a walk and appreciating nature.
Those small wins can add up, giving you momentum to tackle bigger goals.
Exactly. It's building a strong foundation for a fulfilling life, one step at a time.
We talked about how we reach for our phones when bored. I know I do. But how can we use technology to enhance our lives instead of just distracting us?
It's about balance. Technology is great for connection, learning, entertainment, but it can also be a crutch. Be mindful of how much you rely on it to fill empty spaces.
So instead of mindlessly scrolling, maybe be intentional. Use that time to learn, connect, or even just put the phone down and engage with the world.
Exactly. Professor Dankert had advice for parents about this too, especially with their kids. He said it's important to give kids space to figure out their own solutions to boredom.
So let them take the lead. I remember he talked about creating a boredom buster list.
Yeah. It gives kids structure and guidance while encouraging independence. They choose from a list so they still feel in control.
Win-win for everyone. We talked about the myth that boredom fuels creativity. I used to believe that.
It's a common one, but creativity is a skill you develop through practice, not just from being bored.
I guess staring out the window in high school didn't make me a brilliant writer.
Maybe not. But Professor Dankert did say boredom can be a catalyst for people who already have creative skills.
Like the Jimi Hendrix example. He was already skilled, but being born with conventional guitar pushed him to try new things.
And that led him to his unique style. But it wasn't boredom alone. It was his dedication and willingness to experiment.
So boredom might spark a desire for new things, but it's not a guarantee of genius. It sounds like personality plays a role too. Some people just seem more prone to boredom.
Right. Research suggests that's true. People with low self-control, impulse control, and self-esteem tend to experience boredom more often.
So it's not just what's around you, it's also how you're wired. Which brings us back to hustle culture. How does that constant pressure to be productive impact boredom?
It's a great point. When busyness and productivity are valued, boredom feels like failure. We feel like we should always be doing something, achieving something. It makes those moments of quiet feel wrong.
Like if you're not busy, you're not enough, you're falling behind.
Yeah, it's exhausting, and it can stop us from experiencing joy and fulfillment. Those moments of connection, reflection, and simple enjoyment. It's like we're chasing something and forget to appreciate what we have.
So maybe it's not about eliminating boredom, but reclaiming it. Giving ourselves permission to just let our minds wander, explore without pressure.
I love that. Reclaiming our right to boredom.
It's a powerful shift, and it reminds us that fulfillment isn't checking off a to-do list. It's about aligning with our values and pursuing what matters.
Well said. It's about recognizing that boredom isn't the enemy. It's a signal, a catalyst for growth, a reminder to connect with ourselves.
Professor Dankert made a great point, comparing boredom to pain.
Right? It's a helpful analogy. Like physical pain tells us something's wrong. Boredom can tell us something's out of alignment in our lives. It's a reminder to pay attention, listen, and make changes.
So instead of fearing boredom, we see it as a compass, guiding us to a more meaningful life.
I like that boredom's that nudge, that reminder to ask, am I truly living a life that reflects me and what I value? It's an invitation to explore, experiment, and discover new paths.
And that path's different for everyone. What brings joy to one person might bore another to tears.
Exactly. Embracing boredom isn't about conforming to some standard. It's about finding your own path to a fulfilling life.
It might involve new things, old passions, or just more space for contemplation. And that journey might have detours, discomfort, and yes, boredom.
But those unproductive moments can be where you have insights, connections, and authentic expressions.
This has been so eye-opening, but before we wrap up our deep dive on boredom, we need to take a quick break. Don't go away. We'll be right back with final thoughts.
We're back, and wow, we covered a lot in our exploration of boredom.
Yeah, it's amazing how much there is to say about it. It really is. And I don't know about you, but I'm already seeing boredom in a whole new way.
That's great to hear. That shift in perspective is so important.
For sure. So before we wrap up, let's recap some key takeaways. We started by saying boredom's not just a lack of stimulation, it's this craving for engagement, which can be super frustrating.
Right. It's that wanting something but not knowing what.
Exactly. And you explained that boredom actually has a purpose. It pushes us to seek out meaningful experiences and progress.
And that instead of trying to eliminate boredom completely, which is probably impossible anyway, the key is to understand its message and use it for positive change.
Right. We talked about Professor Dankert's approach. First, stay calm. Don't just grab the nearest distraction. Then ask yourself, why am I bored? What's not engaging me?
And then you can either reframe the situation or use that boredom to identify bigger goals you want to pursue.
Right. And we also talked about how this hustle culture can make boredom feel like we're failing, leading us to chase busyness instead of allowing ourselves quiet reflection and enjoyment.
And that can really get in the way of engaging with life in a meaningful way.
Yeah. So maybe it's time to reclaim our right to boredom, to embrace those pauses and just be without judgment.
It is a radical idea in our world, but I think it's crucial for our well-being.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up our deep dive on boredom, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought. What if instead of dreading boredom, we welcomed it as a chance for growth and discovery?
What if we got curious about those moments of stillness and explored them without needing to produce or achieve anything?
What could we discover about ourselves and the world if we embraced that space of boredom?
That's a great question, one I hope our listeners will keep thinking about.
We've learned so much today, and I hope you found it insightful and inspiring. If you want to know more about Professor Dankert's work, we'll include links in the show notes.
And remember, boredom isn't the enemy. It's a signal, a catalyst, an invitation to engage with life in a deeper way.
So next time you're feeling bored, take a breath, resist that quick fix, and ask yourself, what's this boredom trying to tell me?
You might be surprised at what you find.
Until next time, happy exploring.